If you've got the new Ryzen 5 3600 or 3600X or have been on the fence about it, I've got some solid information here which should make your decision easier or help you optimize your streaming setup. Many of you have asked for a review, many have asked for a streaming optimization guide, and this clip that you guys keep sending me.
But you do have to do more tuning. So if you're super budget, wanna like start up your streaming channel, you don't have much money, you can make the 3600 work with effort. And like EposVox can help with that. But the 3700X is where it's
doesn't really give me much of a choice. Now does it? Let's jump in after a word from this video's sponsor.
The Mod Mic Wireless can boldly go where no mic has gone before. This microphone can attach to any headphones, requires no additional wires, features very low latency, a dual capsule microphone, 12-hour battery life, and LED indicators on the receiver so you know when you're muted and or when the battery is running low. And you can basically run your entire house without ever losing a signal. What more could you ask for? Learn more by clicking the link in the video description.
I'm EposVox and welcome back to Stream Guides, your #1 resource for optimizing your live streams and going live. In this video, I'll be walking you through how the AMD Ryzen 5 3600X or 3600 6-core CPU performs for live streaming with OBS Studio, as well as some optimizations for you to keep in mind. If you're looking for this info on the higher-end 3700X and 3900X CPU from AMD, I've already sort of made a video over at launch, but I am doing a follow-up video and those videos are coming soon, so get subscribed and stay tuned. I also, have a cool website coming up for this project. You're gonna like it. My tests were done on the Ryzen 3600X CPU borrowed from Wendell over at Level 1 Techs, installed in the ASRock Taichi X570 motherboard, part of AMD's press kit, with 32GB of RAM running at 3200 MHz with the Infinity Fabric clock set to match it. I have turned PBO on in the BIOS. This is a small kind of auto overclock that helps Ryzen's performance a little bit with no real work required on your part. I have my Founders Edition RTX 2080 graphics card to run the games. Oh yeah, and to cool this bad boy, I'm using the new Noctua NH-U12S 120mm cooler that they sent me for review. I wasn't sure what to expect from these tiny coolers, but man, it's small, it's quiet, and the CPU never gets above 45C in any of my testing. What more could you ask for? This is not a sponsored spot. I've been a fan of the Noctua NH-D14 and D15 for years, so it's nice to see more reasonably sized coolers perform well too. For my performance tests, I set up OBS with either a 720p or a 1080p canvas and primarily tested at 6 megabits per second at 1080p using X264 encoder on fast, medium, and slow CPU usage presets, as well as my secret sauce settings covered in the video here, and then at 720p on slow and slow with my secret sauce settings. All of the secret sauce videos were tested at 8 megabits per second. The games are running full screen at 2560 by 1440 at a 120Hz refresh rate. This is a median format for people who come asking me for help, but is a higher resolution than most streamers are actually using. The most common resolution is 1080p or similar, but the advantage here is that by validating performance based on running at 1440p, anyone running lower than this will have similar or even better results. But this is where many streaming reviews fall short. I didn't just include gameplay in my OBS scene. Very few people out there are just streaming with only gameplay footage showing, and those who do aren't likely to net many followers while doing so. Instead, I also added a face cam using the AverMedia PW313 livestream webcam, review soon, on default settings, and my usual animated webcam frame and recent follower or tipper feed bars. These are on a loop, so everything is consistent between tests. I didn't bother with text or anything else. I felt like this was a good enough scene to more closely simulate a proper streaming setup. Too many people test their streams with just gameplay and then switch to a full layout, and performance is way different. This fixes that. Also, while this is a Windows image made specifically for this benchmarking purpose, I didn't want to keep it totally vanilla, as that's not representative of a streaming setup either. So I had the Stream Deck running with HWInfo64 graphs and controls for my benchmarking process, as well as the GoXLR and app and services running for audio. Before we get started, I did want to note that these test results and optimizations are for low bitrate streaming situations. If you are just recording, you can use a high bitrate or a CRF or CQP value and not have to worry about which CPU usage preset is being used at all, and mainly just use GPU encoding, so this is mostly a non-issue. Generally speaking, this CPU is a monster. For $200 to $250, you can game and stream to your heart's content. I am seriously impressed. This CPU can stream every game I tested at 720p 60 FPS on slow, medium, and with my secret sauce settings on slow, with 0 frames dropped pretty much whatsoever. Seriously, every single one. With minimal impact on how your gameplay feels too. It's truly insane. I wasn't expecting this at all. 1080p 60 gives trouble on medium with a lot of games, especially when it comes down to your actual game's frame pacing and your ability to enjoy the gameplay. And slow at 1080p is not possible on any game I tested, but I believe that 720p is the way to go anyway. If you're feeling disappointed and confused as to why I would celebrate 720p, the limited bitrates required for streaming to Twitch, and that most people can actually stream at, are nowhere near high enough for good-looking 1080p 60 in most fast-paced games, but can be good for 720p, especially with my special tweaks. Granted, the 10 megabit per second cap for Mixer is a little more reasonable for 1080p 60, but even still, that's hard for most average internet connections to stream, and without transcoding for, non-partners, you're gonna have a hard time getting a lot of mobile viewers and stuff to actually watch your stream. As far as the X264 slow conversation goes, I have a whole video essay addressing that here, or linked in the video description. X264's CPU usage presets are just that, presets. They're pre-configured groups of settings of X264, none of them designed for game streaming in particular, and the ones like slow are not at all intended to be run in real-time live environments in the first place. As you can see in some of these tests, going from medium, where there's literally no dropped frames at all sometimes, to slow, where it can drop anywhere between 50 and 90% of frames, yeah, the difficulty curve of pushing each CPU preset is not at all linear. My recommendation is to avoid slow in general, but if you must, the Ryzen 5 3600X, and mostly the 3600 too, can stream slow at 720p in most games. I do seriously urge you to use medium with my special sauce settings, which pull some of the quality gain flags from slow without many of the performance costing ones. Something that I was constantly battling up against here, something that I've run into for years, and I have a salty FAQ rant style video about here linked in the description below, is the issue of limited GPU resources. But I did finally utilize and confirm a specific fix, which is obvious and I have suggested before myself, that made this setup work here. To sum it up briefly, you only have a finite amount of processing power on your graphics card, just like a processor. The amount of power is used by both your game that you're playing and OBS itself. OBS uses the same processing power as your games to composite and render your scene that it streams, your gameplay plus your face cam plus etc. This is inherent to how OBS works and cannot be avoided. To remove this would be to prevent you at all from being able to stream anything but your gameplay as a source, and you won't even be able to change the scale of it or anything like that. Windows 10 has typically done a bad job of managing this and allowing programs to compete with one another. So while your game is using 80% or more of your graphics card and OBS tries to claim another 20% or more, they both suffer. But OBS's performance is the most problematic. You start to lose frames without any obvious reason why. In the Windows 10 1903 update, this situation has improved quite a bit for those gaming at 1080p. Enabling game mode, yes, that's counterintuitive, but turning it on, Windows is now able to allow OBS to reserve some resources that it needs, and it's generally not a problem. However, at 1440p at a high refresh rate and at 4K, it's still an issue. It's being worked on, but slowly. The obvious fixes are to reduce your GPU usage, so lowering your game settings or resolution, limiting your game's frame rate to 60 or 120 FPS, lowering your OBS canvas to 720p, and so on. However, for some games, like Apex Legends in my case, this isn't enough, especially given that my monitors are of mismatched refresh rates. The monitor I'm gaming on is 120Hz, and the monitor that OBS is on is 60Hz. This meant that even though I could get Apex Legends down to only 50% of the GPU on its own by lowering settings and such, having OBS running and was pushing that to 100% and then still losing frames. There is a confirmed bug in the way that the Windows Desktop Window Manager, or DWM, handles different refresh rates when OBS's preview is going that causes this to go out of control and cause performance problems. So the saving grace for this setup was disabling the preview. This sucks, as I regularly monitor my preview while I'm live streaming, but it's a necessary evil. That being said, I still had to frame cap certain games, including Apex Legends, and we'll touch on this in a little bit. And again, none of this really has anything to do with the CPU specifically. This isn't a Ryzen 3600X problem. This affects everything. But I've made recommendations of processors before, and then people run into these GPU limited scenarios and think the processor is the problem. This is something that you have to deal with whether you're on the 3600X, 3900X, or my 18-core i9 7980XE. It's fun. Let's talk about a couple game-specific optimizations and thoughts for a minute. Black Ops 4 and Minecraft were both easy to stream at 1080p 60 up to medium and were unstreamable at slow. My secret sauce settings at 1080p 60 medium work as well, as they also do at 720p 60 slow. Apex Legends, I had to frame cap all the way down to 60. You determine this by seeing what frame rate you can guarantee your game will run at. Apex was not holding a locked 120 FPS, which means that it's still using my full GPU to try to hit that target, but was always way above 60. So I had to cap it to 60 FPS to limit performance enough to make OBS usable. You could of course choose something weird and higher like 80 FPS or 90 FPS, but that gets complicated and you run into other issues if it's not a multiple of 60. Streaming at 1080p 60, frame pacing was a tad annoying at medium, meaning you're not dropping frames in the stream, but your game's frame rate and the render times and your input lag are bouncing around sporadically, meaning that your inputs are not responsive and the game feels and looks jerky. This isn't good. If you're set on doing 1080p streaming for Apex, I'd stick to fast. Otherwise, it can stream 720p 60 slow with my secret sauce settings with no issues. Also, I'm gonna start calling secret sauce settings the Vox config from now on. Using the Vox config at 1080p 60 medium for Apex still had pretty meh frame pacing. I'll stick to fast, but my teammate and I did come in second place. I'm gonna blame the loss on the jerkiness affecting my aim. Totally. Fortnite. Can you believe I actually played Fortnite for this? Again, it also needs to be capped to 60 FPS. It was alright at 1080p 60 up to medium, but again, slow or Vox config at 720p is definitely the best results here. Tekken 7 is apparently pretty tough to run and stream. 1080p 60 was pretty much a no-go, even at medium graphics settings in-game. Even on fast X264 and medium, there was just a little too much hitching and poor frame pacing for it to be acceptable for a frame time fighting game. 720p is the way to go here again. Or just maybe 1080p faster or very fast, but I'd suggest sticking to 720p. Devil May Cry 5 actually ran fine at 1080p 60 medium, but there was some weird hitching during the in-game, the in-engine cutscenes. But gameplay was fine and smooth otherwise, pretty much across the board. Rocket League ran great up to 1080p 60 medium, 720p was flawless. PUBG was really tough. The impact on your frame rate compared to not recording at all is massive. I had insane frame pacing issues and even render lag still cropping up on most of my tests. I 100% recommend capping your frame rate to 60 FPS. My 2080 only even runs it at like 90 FPS most of the time anyway, if I recall correctly, and streaming at 720p 60 on medium or fast. Ouch. CSGO, again, I had terrible frame pacing issues streaming at 1080p 60 even on fast, but 720p 60 even on slow with my Vox config was perfectly fine. Similar story in Battalion 1944 and Destiny 2. Bad frame pacing at 1080p 60 medium, perfectly fine at 720p 60 slow with the Vox config. Overwatch, ooh boy, this is the game that sent me down the GPU allocation issue rabbit hole starting in 2017. It is very CPU reliant for smooth performance as well, and I could not get smooth frame pacing while frame cap to 60 dropped down all the way to faster at 1080p 60. It was bad and nearly unplayable at medium. But 720p 60 slow with the Vox config, smooth as can be. Ugh. It's also worth noting here that if you want to stream and record at the same time, unless you're just saving a local copy of your stream feed using the Use Stream Encoder option for the exact same settings and quality, I always recommend leveraging GPU encoding for the recording side. Set it to a CQP of 14 or 18 and just let it do its thing. Running dual CPU encoders is way too intense even for this CPU and not worth it. But what if you just want to use your 3600 rig as a dedicated streaming PC for streaming external sources such as cameras, game consoles, or gaming PCs via capture cards or NDI? Good news, the Ryzen 5 3600 is great at this too, although results are mostly the same. The CPU and chipset do have enough PCIe lanes that you could see as many as 4 PCIe capture cards or more added to your system, depending on your motherboard, plus USB devices, which is awesome. Performance-wise, you still can't stream at 1080p 60 on slow. It still fails to encode most of the frames. But 1080p 60 medium goes alright in my testing, although adding my Vox config on top of 1080p 60 medium was a tad too much for it. It only dropped about 2.4% of frames during the test encode, but it was dropping them at a regular enough interval that I really wouldn't recommend it. However, once again, 720p 60, even with the Vox config settings, is perfectly fine. Also, I was playing from the preview here, so be nice about the gameplay. This is mostly due to the thread count. 12 threads is not quite enough to push 1080p on slow, but it is for 720p. Gee, I wonder what resolution I recommend streaming at. Also, I did a few hours of Discord Go live streaming on this rig as well. We'll have a video coming on that very soon. I wanted to cover some of the specific optimizations that I had to use to make sure that you had the tools available to make this CPU work for your stream. But you get the idea by now. Stream with a 720p 60, medium or Vox config setup, frame cap your game, disable previews in OBS as needed, and to balance your GPU performance. And enjoy chasing that Twitch or Mixer partnership with this beast of a value CPU. It is not the cheapest chip out there, but the performance value you're getting for your dollar is insane. And honestly, it may be a better value compared to the higher end Ryzen chips. And you can even pair it with a cheaper B450 motherboard as long as it has good VRM cooling. I recommend the MSI B450M Gaming Plus if you need a micro ATX motherboard specifically, or the Gigabyte B450 Aorus Elite for a full-size ATX if you want cheaper boards. Both are under $100. This ASRock Taichi is pretty solid on the X570 side as well. I hope this answers most of your questions you may have about the Ryzen 5 3600 or 3600X for streaming. If you have more, consider joining our inner circle on Floatplane, where you get a special chat channel in our Discord server, behind the scenes content, and early access to videos just like this one. And you might get to join in on our Discord streams. We might be doing those regularly. Like the video, subscribe, do all the normal social things, and keep an eye out for more exciting announcements from Stream Guides. I'm EposVox, and I'll see you next time.